Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. And Devin, thank you for joining us this morning. As you all know, Devin is the co-founder and CEO of OpenSea. But what you all may not know is when he went through YC in winter 2018, the idea was completely different from NFTs. So Devin, maybe we should start there. Can you talk a little bit about your journey from your first idea in crypto to how you pivoted to NFTs?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks so much for having me. So talking a little bit about the kind of early days in crypto for me and my co-founder Alex. So we started as for a lot of people in tech in 2017, crypto was kind of this really exciting new phenomenon, but very unclear the long-term direction. You could kind of squint and see the pieces kind of coming together, but it was mostly just kind of speculation and people thinking about things as opposed to real consumer products being out in the market. Aside from, of course, the use cases for financial type things like Coinbase and exchanges and all that. But in 2017, we were really interested in this trend, and we sort of started thinking of new ideas. And the first idea we had was around sharing your Wi-Fi or your internet bandwidth using cryptocurrency. And that was actually the idea that we applied to YC with. But shortly after applying and getting into YC, but actually before we started actually participating in YC, there was this project called CryptoKitties, which was really, one of the first sort of non-pure financial, non-pure speculative, decentralized apps for blockchains. So CryptoKitties, as many of you may remember, was this digital, or still is this digital cat trading game. And the items inside of the game, these digital cats, are represented on the Ethereum blockchain. And so we just thought this was really interesting and really cool, and sort of started thinking about, well, maybe there are ideas that are less sort of the ideas that maybe people were talking about earlier in crypto around, decentralized marketplaces on blockchains, or like pure base layer new chains, but rather consumer applications that could be used by regular people. And that's kind of what led us to this idea for OpenSea, which is a marketplace for all NFTs.
Yeah, and to double click there, one thing is, I went back and read your application notes actually and saw that, if you think about shared Wi-Fi access, that's not a non-existent market. Your approach was new to it, right? And that's sort of what excited it, at the time for us about the idea and the insight you and Alex had. And if you think about when you pivoted to NFTs, that truly is a non-existent market. And, you've talked about this before, which is, you almost started it like a project. But for all the founders in the audience, the most daunting step at this phase, the phase at which you pivoted, is like, how do you know this is a company or this is an idea that's truly solving a pain point? And you sort of pivoted within the 12 weeks since you were going through YC. So can you talk a little bit about how you built conviction, and what about the idea intrigued you, and what you didn't know for a long time about it?
Yeah, I guess, it's interesting because it really depends on kind of your motivation as a founder, right? Like for us, actually, it was less important whether it was a project or a company than maybe it was to our investors, for example. For us, it was really just like, there's this really exciting, fun thing to work on. And, maybe it's just like remains a very small niche or something like that. Or maybe it becomes this gigantic thing. And we were actually kind of comfortable with both of those outcomes. Obviously, the latter is more exciting. But I think that's like, there's lots of different ways to start a company, but that's sort of one approach you can take, is you can just say, well, I'm actually comfortable with this being a project or a company because I'm just so excited about working on it. And I'm not as wedded to building a giant business and a giant organization. Of course, if that's what you're excited about, then, you do sort of have to have a more of a filter function on how long you're willing to work on something before it takes off. But I also think, we were realistic in the sense that like we did see a lot of those early signs that this was something super exciting and not just like a pure kind of hobby, right? The examples there were just tons of developers starting to experiment with the technology, lots of really, really smart founders, a small number of founders, but entering the space, starting to build things, game developers starting to get excited about this. An early passionate user base that was consistently using the product and giving us feedback. And so all of those kind of ingredients were exciting enough to make us feel like this was worth pursuing just from a pure kind of traction and momentum perspective. And then really it was also just such a fun, exciting, interesting space to work in that alone was enough for us as well.
And so when did it become apparent to you that, that this is really breaking out? Because if you think about, the bull cycle was like you would say it happened really in 2021. You and Alex started the company in winter 2018. So like for the 3 years leading up to 2021, like what were the signs you saw to keep building what you're doing? And when did you know it was going to break up?
Yeah, I would say in mid 2020 was when we saw really like positive signs that we were sort of at the beginning of that kind of like exponential growth curve. So for example, I think like can't remember the timing of everything, but I think in mid 2020 you sort of started to see some of the big NFT art sales. There was like the Beeple sale for $69 million that really hit headlines. Mainstream press started to get a little more attentive. More competitors launched, just those sorts of things. And then in December 2020 to January 2021, we I think went from about like $1 million of gross merchandise volume to $8 million in January. And then by February, I think we did around $95 million of GMV. That was when we're like, okay, this thing, it's actually sort of on the exponential growth curve. And, we really need to aggressively scale up the company, which we probably should have maybe done a little bit earlier. And then pre mid 2020, that there were always sort of the early signs that I mentioned, new projects launching, lots of experimentation. Of course, crypto, if you talk to people who've been in crypto since 2017 or before, like they've always seen like the momentum building, right? It's just a matter of, is there a lot of mainstream attention, or is it mainly just the people who are on the ground floor building and maybe less attention to the space? But it's always really been there. It's just a matter of visibility.
Yeah, and also I remember you mentioned this before too, which is you had a set of passionate user base even in those early years that you could work with them and get feedback and use those inputs for OpenSea. So growing at an unprecedented rate. I mean, there are lots of VC companies that have grown at unprecedented rates, but I can tell you no one that grew at the rate at which OpenSea did, both in terms of user and transaction volume. And as you said, you probably had very few people at the start of 2021 to where you are today. And I want to break down the challenges, right? Because it's really fascinating. It's an N of one company that goes through such unprecedented rates. So what are some interesting technical challenges that you ran into, especially when you, at the end of 2020 to when you hit scale? And also talk a little bit about your team size at the end of 2020 versus today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in terms of technical challenges, so I think one thing that was really helpful was we sort of bucketed or we broke out our mission statement into three components. So our sort of product mission is to build the most trusted, inclusive NFT marketplace with the best coverage and selection. So the first ingredient is trust. And, for that, you really need a reliable a platform that surfaces the right content to people when they're searching for it, right? And so part of that was just scaling the backend infrastructure to accommodate increased traffic to the website, and then also really dealing with these challenges around people now being incentivized to, for example, mint fraudulent items, right, and try to sell them. So really investing in that trust and safety piece of the company has been a both a really big technical challenge and also a really big opportunity for us. And then the second one has been on what we call like inclusivity, right? The ability for regular folks who aren't already deep in crypto and maybe are still learning about it to purchase their first NFT. So there we're investing in things like the ability to purchase directly with a debit or credit card as opposed to first obtaining crypto, really like focusing on the core UX and design of the marketplace to make it easier for people to understand and navigate, and just all of those things that go into core usability. And then the third really interesting one is inventory. So we launched on Ethereum. We're now on Ethereum, Polygon, Clayton, and we just launched our Solana beta. So expanding coverage to new blockchains and ensuring that any NFT on any chain that's worth supporting you can find on OpenSea. So those have been some of the kind of core challenges that we've been tackling. In terms of kind of the hyperscale environment and the team growth, we were just 7 people in 2021 in January. We're now 200 roughly. So, building out kind of those core competencies of the business, operations, marketing, product, legal was just sort of a steady journey over the last year of finding the right leaders. And I think one really exciting thing is that as the industry got more attention, the quality of talent that was excited about working at a place like OpenSea just, exponentially grew in line with that, right? So now the leadership team that we have on at the company is just incredible. And a lot of them don't necessarily come from crypto. They're coming from more traditional Web2, but they're finding this space just fascinating, interesting, and something that they're like incredibly passionate about working on over a long time horizon. So that has been a great help when it comes to hiring a leadership team, is you can get really the top talent to work on this because it's so exciting.
Mm-hmm. That is true. I would say that the leadership team, and in fact, even the engineering team at OpenSea is really one of the best teams. I saw you all scale the team right through last year, as all the technical challenges that you faced with scale also came with it.
Yep.
I want to unpack some of the technical challenges, I think, because it'll be very interesting for this audience. So
Yep.
I'll start with number 2, which is, you had initially few hundreds of users, you scaled to few hundreds of thousands of users. What do you think needs to happen for NFTs to scale mainstream?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One is the natural evolution of use cases, right? So, started with CryptoKitties, which was kind of a game developers got interested in it, but now, later on, people, artists, musicians, and just creators got really excited about issuing more simple NFTs, right? Where it's just sort of owning a piece of a creator's work, right? So so that's sort of been the simple use case that has powered a lot of the excitement over the last year, is these sort of collectible projects. But I think over the coming years, we are really going to see more activity in gaming. We've seen a lot of great activity so far, but gaming is a massive market. And NFTs are really just this perfect fit for the industry. So I think we'll see a lot more adoption come through the creation of more interesting projects in the gaming space. Similarly, event ticketing is another area where you can imagine an NFT event ticket being really powerful, right? The ability to, buy and sell these tickets on a multitude of marketplaces, not just the one specific marketplace for that particular event. And additionally, these things having these collectible value, or maybe even having value inside of virtual worlds, right? So there's just all sorts of exploration that needs to be done. There's projects that are now creating NFTs for physical items. So, having the custody of the physical item with a central party, but then being allowed to, or being able to buy and sell the NFT digitally and then redeem it for the physical item is a really interesting and exciting idea. So all that to say, just all of these use cases really coming to fruition and being built out, I think will be part of what brings in the next generation of NFT folks. But of course, you also need to grease the funnel, right, and ensure
Mhm.
that when someone gets excited about one of those use cases, that they can come in and experience it. And that's really what we're focused on at OpenSea, is making it simple for that new user, as well as the existing power user, to engage with these products, and not be so intimidated by them. And there, of course, as I mentioned, the things we're working on are ability to purchase directly with a credit or debit card, better user education, just better core UX, expanding to new blockchains. It will help tremendously with that, those sorts of things.
That's great. Yeah, and I've seen, even from the start of the cycle of scale in 2021, so many different use cases have come. But like one other point people have often mentioned, but I don't know, I don't think the trend has played into that, is, people expect the NFT, expected OpenSea and the NFT marketplace to follow the crypto cycle of when prices crash versus when prices rise. But that's not been completely true. So can you talk a little bit about, the last 3 months? What did you observe on the OpenSea marketplaces, and especially for some of the projects, the prices have held pretty well, and what's sort of driving that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, yeah, it was sort of an overall, the overall sentiment, was that, a lot of the NFT activity was tied to, for example, the price of Ethereum. And that just has not necessarily been the case month over month. And, there's certainly some relationship between the two, but if you look at kind of some of the dips in the price of ETH, they were actually accompanied by, tremendous growth of the NFT marketplace. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think this just really points to the fact that NFTs are a really compelling, exciting, real use case for crypto. That's and not to say that, some Ethereum, of course, is as well, right? Ethereum is the blockchain that is powering the majority of NFTs today. But the Ethereum currency is a currency that goes up and down, as people in the investment community get interested or less interested in it. Whereas NFTs are literally, they're literally items inside of games or event tickets or works of art, right? These things,
Yeah.
there's no real reason for those things to be correlated with the price of a cryptocurrency that is used to power a decentralized network, right? Just theoretically speaking, those things are very different. And of course, there's the practical element that a lot of the people who are excited about NFTs are deep in the crypto space. So there is that, there's a relationship between the two. But I think, yeah, what's exciting is really the last few months have proven out that these are not just the same thing, right?
Yeah, that's true. And in a space, so now touching on your other point about trust and safety and customer support. One of the things I've noticed about both you and Alex are you're incredibly passionate advocates of your customers. So in a space like Web3, which is so community driven, how do you balance between listening to customers and what they want while maintaining the vision for the product?
Right. Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting one. I think one of the benefits that we've had over time is we've just had a really, and I think new consumer startups across the board, but particularly in crypto, have gotten the benefit of these sort of real time feedback mechanisms through existing social networks like Discord, Twitter, etc. Right, where you have this really vocal, passionate group of users who are DMing you and telling you what you should do differently on your platform. So it's been from day one, like we've always just really enjoyed talking to our users, learning from them, figuring out what it is they want. Of course, what's challenging as time goes on is like the scale gets so much larger that you now have like millions of people kind of with all different perspectives on what you should do. And so I think you sort of develop a more formal mechanisms of like soliciting user feedback, doing it in a less biased way where you're not just listening to the squeaky wheels, but you're listening to the overall user base, and you're able to segment into customer profiles. So we've sort of started developing more of that muscle over time, versus in the early days it was just like we would just kind of talk to anyone that reached out and just figure out what the issues were. And I think that's sort of the natural evolution of startups. But I think in particular in crypto, it's a space where it's just so important for companies to listen to their communities and have like a really strong relationship. And that's something that we've really been reinvesting in over time. In 2021, it was really just, can we keep the platform, stable, and can we scale it? And now it's like we really are making a deliberate effort to invest in the right teams to go and talk to community members and bring that feedback back.
Yeah. And so as you do that, right, and you said you had to keep the platform up and running in 2021, and I know a lot of the team ended up spending weeknights and weekends, trying to keep it up. So how do you keep your team motivated?
I would say it's a great question. I think part of it is really just like, I think the team loves working in the space that we're working in, right? It's like such a fun thing. I started my career at I interned at Flipboard, then I interned at Google, then I was at Pinterest, and then I was at Credit Karma, and all of those companies are really exciting consumer products. But I really think like the traditional Web2 industry pales in comparison in terms of like how fun and engaging it is compared to Web3. Like Web3 is just, it's the Wild West. It's completely new. We're like, no one knows what's happening. Every week there's something exciting and interesting launching, right? And so it's just like so fun to work in. And so being at the epicenter of that and getting a chance to build, one of the most popular Web3 platforms is just like really fun and exciting. Now, of course, like I think there's a lot of work that just isn't as sexy, right? Like investing in our core infrastructure. But I think there are engineers who, if you find the right balance and you listen to your engineers and you figure out like, what are you passionate about? You'll find people who are passionate about like all different areas of the stack, whether that's like tech debt removal and cleanup and making sure the code is really usable and developer efficiency versus like building features. I found that like developers come in all sorts of flavors. And me personally, I've actually often been the most passionate about just projects that improve the development speed of the company, right? And so I can relate, and maybe that's something that helps the team, is having two founders that are engineers and really care about engineering velocity and efficiency, and are always excited about making those investments.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that point. I mean, I would say across YC startups, when we look at what really made some of the startups be way more successful than others, like off the top three attributes, I would say one of them is the speed with which the founders move, and that directly correlates with engineering velocity. So really caring about that, especially for the founders in the audience, let's say that is really your competitive moat versus any incumbent or versus any other startup or competitor that's coming in the market, is the speed with which you ship. You talked a lot about how almost subtly, like all the people that work at OpenSea really care about what they're building and are focused on what they offer the OpenSea's customers. So talk a little bit about when hiring for people, and you went from 7 to 200. What are some 2 or 3 core values you're focused on and you're testing for in interviews?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a blog post, I think it's from the Scale founder, like hiring people who give a shit. I think that's definitely one thing we look for, is right, just people who like are gonna care about what they're launching to the world and like be deeply invested and have like a very strong owner mindset. So I like to like learn about, what are times that what were some of the times that you've worked the hardest in your career, and hearing the story of like, was that because you were forced to work like that, or was it because you just wanted to, right? And if it's the latter, I think that's a really good indicator of just someone who really enjoys building things and launching things to the world and isn't doing it for just because they're being told to. So that's a big one. And then I think we also, I think a really important thing that I've learned over time is, especially when hiring for leaders, is the ability to go really deep, right? So um, I like to sort of probe and ensure that like people are the type of people who will ask lots of questions and like not take, a simple kind of high level answer as ground truth, but like get to the core of it and use that data to ensure that, if they're asking one of their direct reports something, right? If and their direct report can give them the full story, that they judge based on that as opposed to just taking things at face value. So diving deep, I think, is just like a really important thing that I've learned over time, and particularly in engineering, where there are engineering managers who have been pretty distant from the code for quite some time, and so sort of ensuring that you're getting people who are close to the tech and are willing to really like dig in and get excited about not just the people management
Yeah.
side.
And that's a great one too. I think there's another YC CEO who said this, which is if I'm interviewing an exec and I feel really bad and bad about the company and the processes in place, then that's a good exec because they're actually pushing me by
Yeah,
getting into the details of the current status, which is
yeah,
totally expected, by the way, for a company that's scaling as fast
yeah.
as
And
OpenSea.
another one actually that I just thought of is just like that I've been using lately, which obvious, but it's just like, would I be excited about working for the person, right? And actually, there's some of that that's really just about sort of energy, right? Like, some people don't mind working for folks who are kind of low energy and like maybe unenthusiastic. For me, I realized it was kind of you know a deal breaker. Like someone has to be positive, fun, upbeat, enthusiastic. I just otherwise it's just not going to be fun working with them. So within reason, obviously, but like
Yeah.
that's one that I've had sort of a bar for over time.
Yeah, that's a great one too. I realize we have only about a minute left. So I have a two-part question, but it's short.
Sure.
One is how do you personally stay focused and motivated? And two is if you were starting another company today in crypto, what would it be? And it cannot be OpenSea.
Sure, sure. How do I say personally? I like to exercise. That's been really important to me. Take breaks, listen to audio books. Those sorts of things are things that really help me. Yeah, and I think if I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling really pumped and excited, usually that's my default state. But if I'm not, then I try to like take a step back and like figure out why. I've been doing some meditation, but not like super reliably. Um, and then in terms of the second question, um, well, I know there's a YC startup doing one of my favorite ideas, so I'm not gonna give that idea to the audience because now there's already someone doing it. But maybe a game. Even though I don't have any background in gaming, I think there's really awesome opportunities to build awesome games on blockchains. So giving that a shot would be really fun and exciting. It's something that I would be very underprepared to do. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Devin, for your time.
thanks for having me.